Aloha, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. I am SprinkleBeard, and today we're going to be talking about a 1 month review of Watcher of Realms. We are doing this a little early. We're doing this at day 24. I'm about to come up on a busy work week, and I don't want to review this game when I'm like half falling asleep or when my sleep schedule's all messed up. Right now, I have plenty of time. It's like my last day off before a busy work week. So we're going to do this at day 24 instead of like the 1 month mark, which for me is about 4 weeks of play. As you can see here, there's nothing that's too game changing that I'd get in the next 4 days anyways. So with that being said, let's just jump right into it. So, previous knowledge of the game. I have already made an account that is like level 50 or 60, somewhere around there. So, I already had some good knowledge of this game before making a brand new account and then working on it for the last 4 weeks. So, with that being said, some of the progress that I made here is going to be slightly jaded because I already had a good understanding of, okay, what do I need to do to accomplish this or to get to the next stage? So understand that if you guys start off playing this game or if you're not noticing the same results, you might just need to ask some people for help. And some of the help that they might give you might be a little too vague, but it's kind of just the nature of the game. It might be you need more champions for this. And like that's not what anybody wants to hear. However, what they mean is, hey, you don't have this type of champion. Maybe you need 2 to 3 fighters to complete this level. Maybe you need 2 or 3 defenders to complete this level. And that's not what you want to hear as a newer player. And it makes the game feel more daunting than it really is. But it's kind of like a progress check of the game, right? It's the game saying, hey, I want you to be well versed that you can handle multiple types of content. As somebody who's already experienced the campaign once and then went back and replayed through it, that decision making was significantly easier for me to do, or it was very easy to evaluate. This is why I can't beat the level. I just need an extra fighter with some defensive gear, and that's good enough for me to get through the level. That will happen. You know, you'll get better as time goes on, or, you know, the strategies of this game are pretty fun. So, yeah. All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about is the champions that the game starts you off with. I know I have fused, I think, a few of the champions away. So at the beginning of the game, you start off with the champion Voltus. Voltus, I think, is this amazingly well-designed champion. He feels powerful, but he doesn't feel broken powerful. As you level him up and give him better gear, he feels consistent, he feels good, he feels powerful. But again, he never feels broken, stupid, powerful. Even when you hit a new gear point, or after I think it's like the first week of playing, you get a gear set, and the gear set is usually a lot better than what you will probably have at that point. That gear set makes him feel powerful again. And a lot of players, including myself, were at 4 weeks of play, still actively use Voltus. Like he's a good rare, near epic status rare, but he's so well designed. Like he doesn't feel stupid broken. Like he doesn't feel like he's just going to carry you through all content. He feels powerful enough though that yes, he is a champion that is going to pull his weight and then some. And for me, I think that is a perfect example of a game that forces you with a main character doing a good job of keeping it balanced. But the whole point of this game is that the more champions you pull, you know, you might get more interested in Drogo. You might like, you know, lizards with crossbows rather than electric people. Or maybe you like dwarves with fire gauntlets, and that is more your thing. So it is a fantastic thing to say that they designed a champion in a way that feels good, feels powerful, feels like it's worth investing resources into. But also, as you start opening up other champions, you get to see, okay, he's good, but he's got this big limitation, or he kind of falls short here, so I might want this champion instead. Oh, I prefer this champion because they have more damage up front, whereas he's more designed around AoE. So I think it's fantastic game design. They also give you champions like Rex. Rex is the first tank of the game that you get, and again, fantastic design. It feels good as you level him up. As you level him up and give him more resources, he feels tankier and tankier the more that you play the game. I will say a huge issue that I have with the game, I do wish that the game's battle power system better reflected with defenders, that the more HP and more defense percentages that they had, I wish that those champions would get a higher battle power based upon investing in the proper stats of them. I will say that the game is still in its earlier seasons of being created, so there is plenty of room for that to change. However, there are certain levels that are like a battle power check, and if you don't have that battle power but you need a defender, it can make the level look 10 times harder than it actually is. Or the job of a defender is to block as many units as possible. We're not counting on them for their DPS output, but the battle power system is like, well, no, you might need more DPS. But Rex, again, really good design, feels great to use, absolutely love him.
Let me heal your wound.
So next they give you the healer Camille. I'm not sure if this is in the perfect order, but we're going to keep talking like I am saying everything in perfect order. Camille is a good healer. When you get her, she does her job, she feels good. She has a shield that she can put on, so that feels even better, especially when you're paying attention and notice the shield that she puts on certain people. There are times where she clutch heals and clutch shields the right person at the right time, and it feels phenomenal. It's perfect as a first healer, that it is a healer that does its healing job the way that you want your healer to do its healer job and be a healer. There are other healers in the game that are more aggressive. So like one of the first fusions that you can do is the healer Lightlock, but he's actually more of a proactive and damage dealing healer because of the way his kit is designed. With that being said, he feels a lot better than Camille, but Camille feels like that pure healer of, I'm just going to heal people, I'm just going to keep the party alive. Lightlock kind of forces it. It's like, yes, I'm healing, but I'm also doing some damage. Next we get Maureen. Maureen is this really well-designed piercer. Again, I can't speak how highly I feel like they really paid attention to designing their starter champs of each of the classifications. Maureen's kit has a built-in crit into it. She's meant to shoot down aerial units, and she feels good at doing those things. She has a defensive down in her kit, which makes her synergize a little bit better with characters like your Rex or like Barut, who we're going to cover next. She feels good for what she's designed to do. She's got a big personality, and it's funny, I'm not super into pirates or like the pirate motif. She feels fantastic as, no, I'm a pirate through and through. That's who I am. That's what I bring to the table. And it's good character design. And again, she feels good to use. On my first playthrough, I got epics at the very beginning that outclassed her, so I did remove her from my party right away. This second playthrough, I wasn't focused on her, but I greatly appreciated any time that I equipped her and had to use her. She did her job and did it well. Barut, I believe, is the last guaranteed rare that they give you, and then I think after this is where the game can kind of, spiral in different ways for everybody. I do think that there's certain things like Drogo and Gonkba. I think you tend to get them earlier, but I can't say with certainty that they are a guaranteed drop. Barut, I know, is a guarantee. You will always get him. He's the first fighter that you get, and it's kind of weird because when you compare him to Rex, Barut feels a lot worse. However, Barut's job is not to block the lanes the same way Rex does, Barut's job is to punch things in the face and punch them so hard they go back a tile. It feels fantastic. And if you like this little dwarf with his flaming fists, if you gear him up as a damage dealer, he feels really good. He's a ground unit, and the difference between your ground units and your platform units usually have a bigger range of coverage. However, they can't take as much damage, although in the beginning stages of the game, them taking damage is like a complete non-factor. It's something you almost never have to worry about. It's something that makes Barut feel good as well, is that he does take damage. He takes a lot more damage than Rex. So at first you're like, crap, Barut's kind of bad. But if you give him decent gear, Barut punches things in the face really freaking hard, and it feels good. And again, it's good design because his knockback lets him live a little bit longer, or gives him that breathing room where a healer can either get in an extra heal or can throw a heal into somebody else and then come back to Barut. So it's a really good design. I will say, though, on both playthroughs of like my main profile and then this second one, I didn't really use Barut as much as I could or should have. But the times where I had to use Barut, that's where I can really speak of he put in work. Or I remember specifically on stages him just defending 2 or 3 enemies and punching one back as the other 2 would come in, and he would stall them long enough for my damage dealers to catch up. It was great. How do I feel about the rares overall? A lot of the rares in this, I like that they kept the designs for all the rares very simple. And what I mean by that is that, like, she's an attack-based healer, and then when you look at her, when you look at her ultimate, heals 1 more ally. Camille's ultimate is, I believe, putting the shield on characters. Autumn's ultimate is an AoE buff. And it feels good. All the healers feel good and distinct from one another. And the longer that you play the game, you get to see, oh, this healer is just a weaker version of this epic. Oh, this epic is just a weaker version than this legendary. And with each of the hierarchies, right, when you go from rare to epic, you absolutely feel that. And it feels good. It feels amazing. You definitely feel like the epic champions are a lot stronger. Or the epics have like an extra passive or an extra skill. You know, like instead of it being this simple 1 line of text, it's a paragraph of text that you have to read through, but it does something extra. So it's one of those things that does push you away from using these rares as much. I will say each rare has a very unique niche that they fill, and that's kind of for better and for worse. What's nice is it makes it feel good to use each rare in a different scenario. Equally, though, it makes each rare feel very, very limited, so that you only want to pick them on like 1 or 2 stages. Nero is kind of this great example. I love Nero's design. I think he looks cool. I think he sounds good. And reading through his kit, he is all about just doing a lot of AoE damage in big splashes. And he's balanced out by his cost. To summon him out is 29, which is one of the highest in the game. The highest I've seen so far is 31, and that was on a tank, and I ended up just not liking that tank ever because he was so expensive, and then to be a tank on top of it, he often wasn't game-changing. Nero's kind of in that same category. I don't know if he's necessarily game-changing. If I ever make a new account, I am going to invest heavily into Nero and see if I can make him into this like god that I want him to be. I'm going to give him like my best equipment and see if his big AoE damage is as amazing as I think it is. On my first account, I was able to invest in him and he felt great. On this account, though, it was just, we already had like an epic mage before I got Nero. So unfortunately, because of pacing reasons, Nero got outclassed very early. Some of the rare fighters and like the other defender that you get, It's unfortunate because by the time that you get them, like, I love this hammerhead shark. I think he looks awesome. I think his weapon looks awesome. And then he's an AoE fighter, which made me really, really excited to use him. I, unfortunately, on both accounts, again, by the time I tried to use him, I had other epic champions that I wanted to work on first or took priority over him. So I would say that the game's pacing is a little on the fast side, which feels good. I want to stress, it feels good, but it made me not get a chance to enjoy some of the rares that they have. And they have a lot of rares. And again, each rare has a very unique purpose. Once you get up to the epic status, the champions kind of become more well-rounded and better in more situations. So even though Nash here has a really good singular purpose of being an AoE fighter and killing everything in front of him by slashing his sword from side to side and just hitting everything, the problem is that pretty much every other epic does that, or does it in a way that is just a little bit better than what he does. And when they don't do it better than he does, like let's say they are single target damage, their single target damage is a lot better than Nash's AoE damage. And I get that Nash starts off at a 3-star, epics start off at a 4-star, but it's one of those things. Sometimes you might get an epic that just invalidates you using any rare ever. You're just going to be like, nope, not worth investing in. Oh, it's a shame that he looks really cool, and stat-wise, his stats are just going to be significantly less. I hope that's something that gets balanced out in the future. I hope that the rares might get to a point, not... We definitely want that distinction, right? That the epics feel better to use than the rares. But if I was to use a rare, or let's say I loved this shark, heavily invested in him, I would hope that my investments aren't wasted in a sense. And right now, that's a little bit how it feels, that a lot of rares, I would rarely take them above 4-star. And for the few rares like Voltus, who I would argue, yes, are worth taking to 5-star, the truth of the matter is by the time that you're ready to take them to a 5-star scenario, you're going to have at least one epic that you want to be working on. And it's probably going to be better for you to take that epic to 5-star. There's very few exceptions to that rule. So let's talk about shard pulling and epics and legendary champions. Pulling shards feels really good in this game. Even when you get the junk champions, it's cool. I got some food. And for those of you who haven't played a game like this before, if you pull a champion that is like completely worthless to you, so in my case, a green border champion or a gray border champion, like the hierarchy goes gray is the lowest, so all gray champions are not worth it. You can't even pull gray champions in this. You get them only specifically from farming levels. Green is your next hierarchy. They have some basic skills and an ultimate, but it's not like amazing, but it's enough that it would help get you by. Then you get to your rares, and I will say in this game, when you pull shards, you tend to get at least a rare every 10 pulls. I really enjoy this because it means that when you get your first 10 shards, or in your first day, your first week of playing, and you are just pulling shards kind of nonstop because you want to see new champions, you want to see more champions, it feels great, right? You feel like, cool, I'm getting all these rares. And again, since the rares are very good at specific things, it makes you want to level each one of them up and try them and play with them. The game's pacing, like I said, is a bit fast. So I do feel like you start to get epics, and then you even start to get a legendary. You get a guaranteed legendary at the moment that I'm recording this video at around 60. After that 60th mark, it is just kind of a roll of the dice of whether or not you will get a legendary. In this game, it is best to pull on weekends. There's usually a weekend event, so there's a reason for you to pull champions on weekends. On our first weekend of being like, cool, we're going to pull a whole bunch of shards, there was a 1+1 event. What that means is if you pull a shard and you are to get a legendary, you are guaranteed to get a second legendary. And for this account, that greatly changed the way I played the account. What I mean by that is our first legendary was technically Azor. Azor is a decent tank. He puts out some decent damage, which makes me happy. It's very lucky that he's of the same faction as Wrath, and I'm going to get into that detail later. But those were some of the bonuses for having him. But if I had pulled him and him alone on this account would have grown much, much slower. There's players that we'll talk about, they made an account, they pulled some champions, they didn't get a champion that they liked or resonated with, right? So if you don't like dwarves and you pulled Azor, that would kind of suck. But because it was a 1+1 event, we ended up pulling Crack or Crake. I don't know how his name's supposed to be pronounced, and I say it one way or the other every single time. Crack is this shotgun class. So he has this cannon attached to his arm, and he hits in a big blast cone in front of him. He feels great to use. And again, as a legendary champion, both these legendaries definitely pull their weight in their classes. Azor often would tank things, and he could sit in mobs and mobs of things. So even getting him in the early game didn't necessarily feel terrible. It would have just made progression a little bit slower, because typically in this style of games, we kind of tell you to focus on your damage dealers first. They will push you through the super easy, boring content to the point where you get to clever levels or having to actually stretch your resources thin, and it feels a lot better. The defenders, a lot of them just do such little damage, or kind of almost meaningless damage, that they're not a dependable damage source. And I don't know how I would personally balance that out in a game like this. I might instead give them a percentage damage dealt per swing. So instead of them doing like a set damage value, let them focus on their HP, let them focus on their defensive stats, and make it so that their basic attacks do like 3% max HP to the target that they're hitting. That way they would have comparable damage to some of the other players, but their bulk would let them sit on the field for longer. And again, 3% is nothing compared to like a damage dealer. I mentioned Wrath. Wrath just, swings his sword and takes off half the enemy's health in a swing. That's something Azor would never compete with. But also, Wrath can clear out 10 enemies so much faster than Azor could clear out the same 10 enemies. So you would have different advantages for it, right? Again, the legendaries feel absolutely amazing. I absolutely love the design choice of the legendaries. All of them feel unique. I will say, though, there are legendaries that feel much better than others. Right now, Crack has our best gear. We have given him like every resource, so like things to upgrade his skills, the best items, or upgrading him first. And even with all of those things being given to him and putting him ahead of somebody like Valkyra has kept up with him damage for damage, moment for moment. And I get that she's probably like this super rare legendary. So maybe that's just the thing, is that like in terms of legendaries, right? She's kind of like your mythic legendary, whereas Crack is just a legendary. It's one of those things, though, that if I had gotten Valkyra anytime sooner than Crake, or on this account, when I pulled on the 1+1 weekend, if I didn't get Crake, the moment I would have gotten Valkyra, that's when this account would have changed drastically. The game does do a good job. You do get some champions for free. So some epics that you absolutely are guaranteed to get, even if you pull 0 shards. You get support champions like Mari here, where she slows down enemies and debuffs them. So she breaks their armor and breaks their magic resist by 10%, and then it scales up to 15%. So she feels amazing when you get her. There's also a lot of times where she slows enemies down so much that your damage dealers feel twice as powerful. So we mentioned earlier Voltus feeling incredibly balanced. It makes him feel good, but not only that, using her around like a legendary, oh my gosh, your legendary feels like a mythic. It feels like a god amongst peasants. Just makes your big damage dealers feel 10 times more powerful. The shame of it, though, and I don't know how I would balance this out. This is where thinking about game design or thinking about how I want a game to play, I don't know how I would balance this out. But Mari often gets outclassed by like any other damage dealer. It's like, would you want one damage dealer with a support side by side, or would you just want 2 damage dealers side by side, or 2 legendary AoE champions side by side? And it's one of those things that Mari definitely has her place. That like as you get further into the game, there's those very specific levels that, okay, this is where I need Mari. Or we're fighting one big enemy. Cool, this is where Mari's going to shine better. But her base damage is actually one of the lowest damages in the game. So when you get her and you're trying to raise up her battle power, again, what stinks is she's a clever design that you want to focus on attack speed rather than just raw damage with her. And even if you focus on raw damage with her, it's not very rewarding for her. Not as nearly as rewarding as like attack speed or rage regen on her, because you want her using her ultimate. You want her slowing things and debuffing them. So for those reasons, I like that they designed her in a way that it feels better to build her in a different manner than our damage dealers. But equally, it's kind of frustrating because most of your champions, you want to build damage on them. She becomes the singular exception to the rule. And there's not enough champions like that. There's not enough champions that you start off with. And a perfect example I have for this is that earlier I mentioned the healer Camille, or Spring in this case. I'll use her as an example. They have attack-based healing. I get that the game is trying to show, cool, you can use your attack stats on this champion instead. I really, though, believe that they should have done a defense-based healer or an HP-based healer right off the bat, so that you have a reason for your HP gear, your defense gear, and then you would have the choice of, do I want to give it to my healer or do I want to give it to my tank? Because obviously the more my healer does, the more everybody lives. But the longer my tank survives, I can have choke points on the map a lot stronger. After Mari, we get characters like Ein. Ein feels good, and he feels a lot better than Barut. He literally feels like the upgraded version of Barut. He does very similar things. He does it in a very similar style. And then I love that in this game, he has a spear, and they give him an extra range for having that spear. Thematically, it makes sense. It feels good. It is intuitive. I like it a lot. Ein specifically has this ability that if you awaken him, he puts a defense down on the targets that he's attacking. And again, that feels good. It makes a lot of sense with the spear. That the whole point of a spear was to poke holes in your enemy's defenses and go through thicker, heavier armors. So I love that thematically. It makes a lot of sense. Ein, however, does feel very squishy along with Barut. They kind of have that same problem where they're almost a little bit more gear dependent. And the game also doesn't really tell you this at any point, but your defenders and your fighters, they're guaranteed to do neutral damage to the targets that they're hitting. So even enemies that have a really high defensive value, when Ein attacks them, yes, he's doing physical damage, but he's also doing like neutral damage. So he's guaranteed to do like consistent damage. Whereas your piercers, so like your archers, and then your mages, they have different enemies that they hit for bonus damage, and then the opposite enemy they hit for like less damage. So with that being said, Ein, if you're not paying attention to the damage numbers specifically, he'll feel like a squishier version of a defender. And I feel like if they maybe highlighted that a little bit more, or highlighted, hey, this is where Ein and Barut shine a bit stronger, this neutral damage is very good. And you kind of don't get this realization until you are 2 weeks in, and they give you the last champion that the game is like, we're guaranteeing this drop for you. They give you Wrath. Wrath is a legendary wrapped in purple. He's a legendary champion that just so happens to be an epic, or they tuned down some of his defensive stats to keep him balanced, except that he's not balanced. He absolutely puts out ridiculously high damage numbers. He is worth giving your best of best gear to. When it comes to skills, give him all your purple dust, give him all your purple crystals, and let him carry you. What I like about a champion like this and that design concept, there are plenty of games like this or other gacha games that you might play where you are given a champion and the champion is okay, right? It is serviceable, it fills that role, but it doesn't feel great to invest a lot of resources in it. It feels like a placeholder. So when we talked about the rares that we get, where we get like Camille, she's a good healer, but she's also just like serviceable. The moment you get like almost any other healer, you're gonna test out that healer. And Camille, although she's good at single target healing, the moment you get Spring, who can heal multiple targets, or Autumn, who AoE heals anybody in her range with every heal, you instantly start, okay, maybe Camille's not my thing. And for some people, it's cool. I got Camille. I have the most levels on Camille. I'm just going to focus on her. Wrath does this really good job in this game that the more you invest in him, right now, I would argue that he's very overtuned. He's way too powerful. But that also feels good because, again, Barut and Ein kind of feel a little lackluster. Wrath feels like a god. If you put him on the battlefield and put a healer behind him, you know Wrath is going to carry you the same way that we anticipate our legendaries like Krak or Valkyra to carry us. So I think Wrath is kind of some of the better design. Ein, I hate to say it, he's another epic with a little bit of a longer range. So I get that they make him like a little squishier, or, he doesn't put out like a ridiculous damage output since he can reach a little bit farther. But yes, Ein does not feel the same type of powerful that Wrath does when you get him or when you fully equip him. Upgrading champions. So in a gacha game, right, we have a couple of different ways of upgrading our champion. So I'm going to use Gonkba here as an example. So our first basic way to increase our power is just by leveling them up. So here we can see if we level him up, he's going to gain like 16 attack, and he's an attacker. So that's great. Some extra defense, 3 extra defense, not a whole lot. Extra magic resistance, so he's more magically resistant, so that makes sense. Some HP. It feels good leveling them up. The progression through the levels, it doesn't look like you're getting a lot of XP, but it does end up adding up. It becomes worthwhile EXP at any given point, so it never truly feels bad. Eventually, right, you start getting ways to upgrade their skills, so you'll upgrade their skills. You will get gear, so you can gear them up, and right now I've Gonkba naked, but you can gear them up, and that feels better. And then eventually you get to the point in the game where it starts talking about promotions, that you can promote them, and in here you might get an extra passive. That feels amazing. I think that's really well designed to have a portion of their kit locked away until you promote them, because it's just like, for me, I just think that makes good game design, or it makes you feel rewarded for investing materials into this character. Then at 2, sometimes their coverage or what they're capable of covering often changes. And for like defenders, they might get an additional passive that makes them bulkier. Your healers might get something that increases their range, or might change the way that they heal. And then normally at level 5, there's another one. So with Wrath, I'm going to go back up to him for the moment. At level 5, computer, can you catch up while I'm talking? At level 5, Wrath gets this extra crit rate, and then he has a chance when he crits to attack twice. Things like this, I think, are really good design, especially at this 5th tier, rather than it always being at the 6th tier. And I say that because it makes it feel like a better steady stream of progression rather than, okay, I finally took him up to 6-star. This is where he also, becomes super amazing. This lets you invest into characters without having to invest everything into the characters. And you still feel like you're getting rewarded. To get characters to 5-star, it kind of seems a little daunting at first. It's not super difficult. And the game does give you plenty of resources to take characters from 4-star to 5-star. If, with my previous knowledge, it made sense on this account, we were going to save those resources and try to make Crake a 6-star as quickly as possible. Because a lot of these games, once you make a 6-star champion, they do become a god. They feel absolutely phenomenal being 6-starred. And Crack was no exception to this. He absolutely pulled his weight. He's doing tons of damage. If I had no legendaries, Wrath would be the clear 6-star. Wrath 100% would be get him to 6-star as quickly as possible and feel the power that he brings to the table. I absolutely loved getting Crack to 6-star. And it was ironic because we were saving some of our resources and not upgrading everybody. We were able to get Valkyrie up to 6-star like a day later than Crack. And again, Valkyrie at 6-star is just performing so well and holding her own and then some. There's times where I'm having to use her as an off tank for the times that I don't bring Azor to battle. And again, because she's a legendary, she's able to absorb a lot of that damage, but she is still taking damage. So she still feels like the fighter that she's supposed to be, but she feels good. Like, cool, she's a legendary champion. So yeah, she's not easily brought down. There's always those legendaries, right? There's like super glass cannons that the moment they get nicked, they just start to crack and break and then they just die. And that feels awful to be like, what the heck? I'm a legendary champion. I shouldn't die to this random archer walking up and shooting 2 arrows at me. But yeah, the legendaries in this game feel good. The leveling up, the promoting, all that feels good. Then they have awakenings, and some of the awakenings can greatly change how a character plays. Wrath has some of the most ridiculous. I'm just going to kind of go through these without talking about his specifically. But Wrath as an epic, when we talk about awakening champions, all of his awakenings really change the way that Wrath plays, or makes him play twice as good as he was playing before. And it's one of those missed opportunities where Wrath, they did such a perfect job with Wrath, but then when you go to other epics, some of the other epics, especially if you don't like them in the first place, their awakenings feel or look even worse. Or there's some epics where reading through their awakenings, like Wrath has this heal during his ultimate, which makes him go from like that epic feeling champion to an absolute god killing machine. You can put him face to face with Dragon, who's the big bad of this game, and Wrath can sit there and tank Dragon for days on his own, and it feels amazing. I do wish they would do that for awakenings on other champions. One of the other huge missed opportunities is they gave all these epics and these legendaries very unique awakenings, which I love. But then when it comes to the rares, they do this super inconsistent thing. And I'm going to talk about both halves of it real quick. So number one, all of the trees for the rares are the same. What it is, it's like HP, a main stat bonus, more HP, more type of main stat bonus, or like what their role is. So for like the tanks, it's more damage reduction. For the healers, it's like, I don't know, attack speed or something. And then for the damage dealers, it's attack bonus at the end. For the healers, it's a healing multiplier. I get it, that's a good blanket thing, but it feels terrible that your Voltus, your Gunkba, and your Nero, and your Drogo all have an identical tree. And especially when you get to the point where you start getting epics and you start reading that they have these really unique awakenings, for the rares to have these super staticky ones. I would be fine if it was static for, like, let's say the first 4, but make this 5th awakening, make it better than just this flat crit rate. Have it be crit rate and then something extra as a bonus onto one of their skills. So for like Voltus, he sends out this lightning that hits 3 enemies. Have it during his ultimate that it has a small chance to stun. Like even if it was like a 5% chance to stun. Or have it during his ultimate, he can hit 1 more target. Drogo, he fires a crossbow that hits tons of different things. Let him hit an additional target or 2. Nero is all about causing these big giant fire bomb, thing. Have him inflict burning or something, something thematic, or let him hit an extra target or 2, like with his basic attack and his ultimate. It's one of those things. I'm sure that the game had its limitations, or they only had so many resources before the day that they wanted to launch this game. But I do hope in a future patch, this would be a great way to make the rares feel more unique. The rares feel great and unique currently. However, the moment you start getting epics, it's like, so the moment you get an epic mage, ignore Voltus. The moment you get an epic fighter, ignore Barut. The moment you get an epic defender, Rex is gone. It's kind of like that mindset, right? Now, Rex is kind of the small exception because if the cost of the defender is too high. So Titus, I got Titus, who is a defender. He cost 31 cost to get out, which again for me is the highest cost I've seen in the game. I never used, like I used him for like 2 or 3 levels and then was like, this is unrealistic. Like 31 is so much to cast. And then it's even worse because it's 31 to cast and he's not like a godly epic. He's just like, he's an all right epic, or he's got some potential. I do think that with the proper gear, Titus could feel better. But Titus is that perfect example of the cost of the champion can make it feel worthless. Nero is in the same category, that his cost is 29 to summon him out. Gonkba at 24 feels bad to get out. Nero should be like 25 to 27. I would say 27 might even be better. But when you summon him at 27 or at 29, you're expecting that Nero's going to come out and be a god for how much he costs. And then he just kind of performs okay. And again, he's a rare. I get that he's a rare and they want that limitation. But it was a bit disappointing. And then I got his daughter on both my accounts. And his daughter's kit is kind of contradictory. So I hope that's something that they update in the future and balance out a little bit better. Dragon and the Tide. So in this game, we have a guild boss. So there's a reason for you to talk to other players. I like the concept of guilds, and even though I know when I played other gacha games, people didn't like the concept of being forced to play with other players. They wanted to play by themselves. I did like the concept of a guild because this is one of the ways where you can have other players to talk and other players to ask questions to. And your guild members want you to actively do better. They're not going to troll you unless they're just a trolly guild, but they are going to help you succeed more, because the more you succeed, the more the whole guild succeeds. So they are more inclined to help you and make you get the right knowledge to progress. If they're looking at your team and they see that you're using a Nero or a Drogo, so the clan I'm in here, I don't have that example, so I'll use like Barut or Voltus. Oh, this person Turks could do better by replacing Barut or Voltus and removing them out of the party. Yes, they could be doing better, and they will be doing better. But right now, that is probably the best that they have. And I like to see that they have all 5-star champions. All of them are fully promoted. So this person, Turks, is doing a good job. He's doing just fine. But Dragon feels good. Dragon feels like a good, fair clan boss. He doesn't feel like brokenly overwhelming. But in terms of like mythology, right? You're fighting this big old scary dragon. He feels decent in that regard. He looks pretty cool for a dragon, right? He looks threatening, imposing, intimidating. the move set that he uses, I do like it. I do wish, though, at the lower levels that he had a single target attack. Admittedly, I've only gotten up to, I think, Nightmare 3 on my main account, but so far he only has like AoE attacks. I do wish that he had a single target attack, or Raid Shadow Legends made this joke and then they never revisited it, and I thought that was a massive missed opportunity. But in Raid Shadow Legends, they have their dragon. During one of the first fights of the game, it actually eats one of your players. They end up using it later in a Hydra fight, but that was something I wish that this dragon did. I think it would also make this dragon fight a little bit more interesting, and not make the dragon specifically target one person. Not like, oh, the healer's doing too much and is pulling aggro, I'm going to eat the healer. Although that might make tanks more useful in this fight. Right now, tanks just don't make any sense to bring to this fight. But yeah, I don't know how you would implement it. I do think a complete randomness would make the fun more fight and engaging, so that way players are not forced to auto fight nonstop. Because eventually you just hit that wall of, okay, I got this. This is now just a daily chore. I'm just going to auto fight and walk away from my phone, or walk away from my PC. That is something that I think could be a little bit better, or a little bit more engaging for the clan boss. I do know, though, in this style of game, it is very common to have auto runs or to have an auto play feature. The Tide. The Tide is this other game mode, and this is specifically based upon your account's battle power. I didn't save a run, which I should have, so that I could show you what it actually looks like. But it's this really cool concept of, hey, you're defending this like town or this castle, so you're on these ramparts, and you can place your heroes around the gate to the city to defend it, and then you can place your fighters and defenders in front of the gate as like a last stand. And it is known, it is like said in game, you are just going to be attacked by swarms and swarms of enemies. And this is probably like, you know, we're going to hold out for a little bit, but eventually we're going to die. This is a good way to die. It is perfect for what the Tide is. I will say, for the title of it being the Tide, I know that this would just add time onto the game, almost like just padding onto the game. I wish the numbers were much larger than what they're at, because it's a really cool design, a really cool concept. It's over way too fast. It's like 30-second rounds, or sometimes like 20-second rounds, but just a giant wave or 2 to 3 waves of enemies come running at this wall to try to break through, and you just watch your champions, like, they get bigger and bigger the more waves that you complete. And when they throw out their AoEs and it just kills off half of a wave, it feels good. It feels amazing. In all honesty, if there was another game that was a tower defense like that, where it like just waves and waves of enemies, zombies is kind of the most classic version, but you could do things like, you know, like ants, or like little demon bugs, demon snakes, demon bats, right? Like things that you think of in mass numbers. It's a really fun game mode. It's a really fun game mode. My biggest issue with it is it's just 100% based around your account, the champion's battle power. So whoever you have on the platforms and on the ground, they're the only ones who are affecting what is actually happening. And like, I get that's how every level works, right? But it's just a BP check. So you could put in every single character that's a damage dealer with like high crit rate and high crit damage. And because those BPs are calculated much higher than your defenders having large HP and large defense pools, you're going to hard clear the waves. And in terms of the Tide specifically, its progression, I think, is the worst in the game. Because when you're starting off on the Tide, the first like 1 through 10 waves, you don't even know what you're doing. Like there's no strategy to it. It's just, my characters are on the wall and they killed everything. I get that we want the first couple of waves to be easy, but the first couple of waves should also be the tutorial. They should be teaching you how to design where you want certain champions. Or I get that it is a tide of enemies, but have some just giant HP sponges in there so that your single target champions still feel good to use in the tide. Again, I get it's called the tide and it's all about massive numbers, but there's almost no reason to bring a single target champion, and it makes you feel like in the main game and in the tide, you don't want any single target champions. And then when you get to clan boss, okay, I do want single target champions. But most of the game, it's just like, no, your AoE champions do plenty of damage. There's no reason I want a single target champion. And I don't know if that's something where maybe the single target champions might need that buff that they do like extra damage because they're doing single target. I don't know how I'd balance that out properly. I do not know how I'd balance that out. But like for my first 30 to 50 waves, especially on my first account when I was first playing this game, Tide was a lot of fun. It just felt like free resources every day though. Like there was no thinking about it. There was no strategizing. There was no, okay, maybe I need to move this champion here. Nope, it was just plug and play. Just throw a champion in, let the wave run, and I killed everything. There was no challenge or thought. And I say this because the campaign is done in a very good way where there were levels I had to strategize around. There were levels that this made me think differently. When you open up gear raids, those made me think in a different way. When you play faction wars and you get very restricted champion pools, I dislike factions in like every game, and every game does it for some reason. I don't get it. In this game, there's a little bit more of an incentive to do it, I will say. They made faction lords have extra abilities so that you can proc them, and that so far feels really good. But yes, playing with the limited number of units, those faction wars, again, challenges you to be a little bit more strategic, or being forced strategic, being like, okay, well, I only have these 2 archers and a mage. How am I going to beat this level when I have 2 different points to cover? I don't know if I have enough coverage for this. And the obvious answer is we'll just go summon a whole bunch of things until you get more of this faction. So it's kind of like an incentive to pull, but you actually have no control over what you pull to pull more of that faction. That's something else I would like to see in the game, is like maybe on the weekends have certain factions have big bonuses so that if you're working on your factions, you could have a targeted summoning and have a higher chance of getting things out of that faction. I get, though, a lot of the games that have like a reason for you to pull on weekends, they need to make the weekends look as flashy as possible because this is a free-to-play game. So when you're paying for content, I get that this is a way that they need to make money, and you can't have so many things on the weekends, or you don't want things to contradict each other. So like this past weekend, they had 2 legendary champions where you had an additional chance to win them. I get that you wouldn't want to force in a wrong faction along with those legendaries. It wouldn't make a whole lot of like thematic sense. So I get there's limitations and restrictions, but yeah, it's a lot of fun. All right, rewards for going deeper into the game. What I really like is we're going to first start talking on this hub here, but they have a privilege card you can buy. This is like one of those monthly subscription things. This one is amazing. I won one during an event and it lasted for 3 days. And the rewards I got from it in those 3 days made me want to buy the privilege card instantly. I think the privilege card is super well designed. It is very cheap. It's, probably the 10 or... I haven't looked at it since I started playing. It's probably $10 to $15, but it's not overly expensive for the month. And for how well this game is, like, it looks beautiful. It plays really well. It does drain your battery on your phone. The rewards you get for this, they take away some of the pain points of the game, or like the really, really grindy aspects of the game, and they make those feel a lot better. They either give you extra rewards or like extra rewards sometimes. So like you feel like you're getting your money's worth, but it's not broken. Like, oh my gosh, if I don't have this, I'm never going to be able to compete with other players. It felt great to have this active, so I absolutely love it. You can buy other things in game, like gold bonuses, where you get 100% increased gold, which is the main currency of the game. And they did a good job of keeping your currencies pretty low in this game. It is a gacha game, though, so eventually you're paying attention to like 18 different resources. I don't know how I feel about that still. It's frustrating. However, once you get into the world of a gacha and you get used to those 18 different currencies, it becomes okay. It's not awful. Yeah. I don't know how I want to talk about that. EXP bonus, it feels good. Something that I love in this game is that as you're playing through the campaign, as you play through normal, you unlock EXP rates because they understand you're gonna be pulling new champions, or you might get to a level where you just need to level up. So they made certain levels where it's cool, you can just farm this level and get a crap ton of EXP. That is really good game design. Absolutely love that. When you get to hard mode, they then give you the opposite side, gold farming levels, because at that point you're going to be upgrading more gears, or you now have 30 champions that you're struggling to gear all of them up and you need more gold. Or as you're ranking champions up, which is just like a core mechanic of the game, you do need some gold for that. It's a very smart game design. I do love it. I do love that they separated your EXP from your gold. Other gacha games I've played, there was just like one level and you would regrind the same level over and over again because it had the most EXP and the most gold that you could get for the least amount of energy, which is like your resource to play the game, spent on it. It's really good design. I really enjoy it. They have in this a pantheon, which is like these very passive buffs that you get that permanently affect your account. You have to play through the campaign to a certain point where you will unlock your pantheon, which is this dragon. This dragon's name is Hyperion, so I don't know why they call this the pantheon when it is Hyperion. And then as you do certain tasks and faction war stuff for Hyperion, he gives you these bonuses in some regard. All of these feel good. All of these apply to any content that you're doing. So there is a reason that you want to focus on your faction wars in this, and therefore there's a reason you want to be constantly pulling shards. You will eventually get to a faction that maybe only gives you these red emblems, and you don't want to be farming the lowest tier of red emblems constantly, especially when the red emblems end up giving you attack bonus and crit damage, which are your two biggest damage multipliers in the game, where holy crap, you're gonna feel like redonkulous by, working on this faction. Likewise too, there are times where if, depending on what champions you pull, I'm going to make something up, I don't know if this is true about the game. Let's say this is the Nightmare faction, right? They give you red emblems. If one account pulls a couple of nightmares, like 2 to 3 nightmares right off the bat, their account could skyrocket 10 times faster than somebody who pulls like 2 healers or 2 like tanks in an early stage. And that difference in progression, I'm concerned about. I guess that's the best way I want to say it, is that I can see certain players that if they pulled an epic or a legendary like healer as their first thing, they are probably not going to have the same fun playthrough of the game of somebody pulling like a mage or a damage dealer. So, and again, I want to stress, Voltus is good. You can use Voltus for a long time. So if you pulled a legendary healer, yes, I would just be like, cool, level up and rank up your Voltus to rank 5 and promote him to a 5-star and he'll be fantastic for you. But again, I want to stress that depending, and like it's the whole point of gacha, is that everybody's experience is going to be slightly different and they're therefore more fun to talk and compare certain things. I do want to stress, though, that like the damage dealers, if you get damage dealers in the early game, you are 10 to 20 times more set and more capable than like some of the healers or some of the tanks. And then something else that I kind of like, I'll get into this in more detail later, but a critique that I have that could be better. So in the upper left-hand corner of all these characters, they are part of a certain faction. And there are certain champions that are not part of factions. And a lot of them tend to be these lizard people. So depending if you get some of these lizards, or let's say like me, you're like, oh man, this is a really well-designed looking lizard dude. I like this. This looks good. I think he looks cool. I like the bone motifs on him, and like all the lizards typically have like light armor or like very low gear on, like low armor and stuff on them, so they look pretty cool. And even the heavily armored ones, they still are very tasteful, and it makes a lot of sense for being this like lizard barbaric tribe in the game. They're not part of a faction. So let's say I got Drogo, or a legendary version of Drogo that doesn't belong to one of the factions. I think all the legendaries do, but my point is, let's say I got Drogo early, I made him into my god, I've invested tons of resources into him. You know, all the factions, he's not useful in any of the factions. Like there's one faction where you can use everybody. It doesn't matter whom you use, it's just a daily faction thing you can do. It's well designed, I like it. I can use Drogo there, but then when it comes to the individual factions, he's just randomly not part of a faction. Almost all the goblins have no faction. Like there's one, I can think of one goblin who has a faction, but all the goblins have no factions. And it's like, well, what if you like goblins? Like I really liked the goblins in this game. I typically don't like goblins. I liked these goblins. I think they look cool. I think they have a great design to them. But I'm sorry, 2 of the goblins are part of factions. But yes, if you like goblins, and there's like 5 goblins in the game, I really hope they make some epic and legendary goblins going forward and give them some interesting factions. Don't make them part of the good guys. Don't have a good guy goblin, or if you do, make him a ridiculous good guy. Make him like silly as crap. But yeah, that is a little thing about Faction Wars. I will say though, what I like about this Faction Wars is that the more you play, it is one of those things that you start getting these static buffs where it doesn't feel like a lot each day. You know, you're getting like, you know, here a 1% rage increase, which is, I don't want to say extremely small, but it's small. It's not, for every 1 level I put into here, it's not going to be massively noticeable. When it does become noticeable is when you're getting these up to like level 30. That is when you're like, oh man, this character, I like them a lot, but their ultimate takes forever to come back up. That's where you're like, cool, maybe I can go do some faction stuff. Maybe instead of worrying about it as a gear slot, I could equip this character with this. Instead of it being an item, maybe I'll pair this partner with it and whatnot. This feels good. As you're playing through and as you're leveling up, these stats feel good for a while. On my main account, I've cleared 2 out of the Faction Wars, so I'm getting like the last emblem that you can currently get, and these rewards are starting to stack up and become very noticeable. Like my crit damage is getting closer to like 10%. My attack speed's getting closer to 30, and trust me, you will absolutely notice the difference between 0 attack speed and 30 additional attack speed. It's a really good game design, keeping the numbers really low, but it makes sense. And when you go into the actual game, the numbers scale up quite high, and it's really nice. The community of the game. In all honesty, the community of this game is very quiet compared to what I'm used to. Gacha games kind of always have bots going on, or players are always throwing out the invites for their guilds because they've either lost a player or they're, you know, trying to maximize the number of players that they have. That's a different language. Don't mind that for the moment. I get that in gacha games, there's no way to stop all these bots. I don't think that's... It's frustrating because I really wish that the game makers could see this player is talking at very select intervals or is talking 800 times more than any other player. Even the most talkative players are not talking as much as this bot is spamming. I think that there's an easy way to stop the bots. I also think that's probably just another way for them to gain some extra money. And if that's the case, if that's a way for them to gain extra money so that they can keep this game free to play, I don't mind the bots. I honestly don't really mind the bots. And ignoring bots is pretty easy. I would say that it's very rare that you have like 10 bots in a channel. Usually it's like 2 to 5, and 2 to 5 are pretty easy to ignore. They're not spamming every minute, but they're spamming frequently enough that, you know, a lot of chat just seems to be invite from this guild and, you know, go to this bot thing. And if you have a good guild, the guild invites just act like a different version of spam. Other than that, I have found one channel where everybody's pretty chatty and I've like hung out there a little bit, but the community other than that is pretty quiet. I do end up talking to my guildies more than anything. I do enjoy that. I do enjoy talking to my guild mates, and it makes the guild feel a bit better. I also got lucky that I found the right guild where mentally all of us are kind of on that same page, or we're a very relaxed guild. We're not too serious about progression, but all of us are like naturally competitive where we want to be constantly progressing. So we have a good variety of veteran players, a couple of newer players, and a lot of like middle players. So right now things are going well. We're also a guild where we're like, we want to be the best guild without players having to pay to win. Yes, some of us pay to win, others of us don't, but we as a guild mentally are on that same page. I absolutely can see certain guilds just being like, yeah, unless you're buying things or unless you're spending so much money per month on this game, you're probably not going to be a good member of this guild. And recently they announced Guild Wars, and unfortunately for me, I don't love the concept of Guild Wars in a game where people can pay to win. That is literally just whoever has the deepest pockets is going to win those fights, or whoever can work on their impulse control. Maybe they're not buying every single day, but then whenever there's a guild event, that's when they're dropping like $500. I kind of feel like that's a bit dirty, if you will. I get, though, that this game is free to play, and for the record, for this game being free to play, it is amazing. It is beautiful. It is fun. It is well designed. I've enjoyed it. The strategy in it, the further into the game, the strategies do get more complex. I don't feel so heavily restricted to being like, you just need this legendary. However, and this is going to get, I'm going to just segue into my last section right away. My frustrations with the game were things that I really think the game needs to improve on in order to keep players around for a longer period of time, or to make players want to spend more money on the game. The amount of advice that I get from end game players, I'm going to say it like that, players who are focused on end game content, coming to my streams or coming to me. I'm level 36, which is very young in this game. I would say anything below 50, you're probably still in the early stages of the game, and that's perfectly fine. Like, you're still probably having tons of fun with the game, and you're not stressing any one thing particularly. The amount of times I have end game players not ask me any questions and try to give me advice that I did not ask for, or being like, hey, I want you to like use this champion when I don't even have the champion, is by far one of the biggest frustrations of the game. Yo, what's going on, Bad Al? It's so funny that I host a Twitch channel that is focused on helping new players or people that are free to play and learning some of those core skills and working on your basics. So for any of you who study something like a martial arts, if you are not strong with your basics, your more advanced skills are not going to be better. They're going to be limited, and there's going to be big cracks in what you're doing and how you're playing. It is the same thing for video games like this. You need to make sure that you have some of your basics underway. Or there's some players who were brand new and they're like, oh, how come I'm looking at this player who's level 10 and they have 8 legendaries and I have no legendaries? What are they doing different? I focus on helping those players, right? Hey, there's weekend events where you might want to pull your shards on the weekends, or there's this ×2 event where the chances of getting a legendary or an epic, you have twice the chance to get one of them. This is a good weekend to pull. This past weekend had a 10 times event. Now, obviously, a 10 times event sounds amazing. The way a 10 times event works says, if you are to get a legendary champion, then that legendary champion has 10 times the chance of being this specific champion. It's a good style event if you are trying to get a very specific legendary, if you're aware of your pity timers, or again, if you pay to win, which there's nothing wrong with pay to win. I want to stress that. There's nothing wrong with it at all. As a free-to-play player, it does make it impossible to compete with them. But I have no problem with people who pay, or they're like, hey, I earned $300 for my job as a bonus, and I want to spend it on this game. That is absolutely their prerogative. And for the record, I absolutely think Watcher of Realms is worth spending money on. I think this game is amazing. With those things being said, though, for some newer players, or players who, like me, if their budget is in a hard place at the moment and they don't want to have to spend that extra money, avoiding those 10 times events can be a good thing at first, and focusing on the 2 times events so you can get a couple of legendary champions, which again, in this game, to circle back to something we talked about earlier, your legendary champions feel super amazing in this game. Your epic champions feel very good in this game, to the point that just getting 1 or 2 can change how you perceive this game or change your experience of the game. There is some good epic champions that are very similar to legendary, right? Like the amount of like effort that they put into your team is legendary like status. And I get that the game is at a new point, right? The game is still in its brand new stages. I don't think we're even at a year yet of like longevity of the game. But it's equally frustrating when every single top player and their mother comes into my streams or my chats. Why aren't you using Dolores? If you had Dolores, you could beat this. Oh, just use Dolores. Oh, you're struggling at Dragon? Just use Dolores. That, to me, is a very, very frustrating and bad game design when one name comes up nonstop and it's use this champion or you cannot beat it. I get that each champion has a design and has a purpose, and there's times where you really hit the nail on the head. So Dolores is this healer and buffer. Mostly she's a buffer, and she does an amazing job at buffing. But equally said, she's so good at her job. There really is no other person that does her job, something similar to it, or something even comparable to it. It is use Dolores, or you are not ever going to hit the same high numbers that everybody else is hitting. If that is Dolores's job, right, is hitting those high numbers, I get it. But then have the other healers and the other buffers keep up with longevity for longer and make them more useful at increasing the longevity and whatnot. Some of the other healers, if you read through Dolores's kit, and then you read through some of like even like the legendary champion healer kits, you're like, yeah, Dolores does that. Yeah, Dolores does that. Yeah, Dolores does that. And Dolores is an epic, so you can invest a lot of resources much easier. You get those farmable materials very easily to fully upgrade Dolores, whereas any of the legendary healers literally can't compete with her.
because you can upgrade all of her skills 10 times faster than a legendary's. You can awaken her 10 times easier because she's an epic, and you're more likely to get an epic copy than you can the legendary champions. I like it in terms of a game design, that cool, they made this really powerful healer slash buffer, so that if you get that on your account, cool, I don't need a legendary healer. I have Dolores. I can use her for a while, but she should be comparable to the other legendaries. The other legendaries should feel just as good as Dolores. And I can't tell you that in all the content, so like in Arena, Dolores is super popular, and the guild boss, Dolores is super popular. I can't even imagine where Dolores is not popular. It's one of those things. Dolores either needs to be balanced down, or you need to buff up your other healers. One champion should not be that almighty in a game. And again, it feels good when you get that Dolores, but it's equally frustrating when every single player is just like, oh, just use Dolores and you'll beat this content. Oh, just use Salazar because he has bleeds and fire and burning, or I'm making things up at the moment. But it is that same concept of just use this legendary and you'll beat this content. There is no way in a gacha game for me to pull that specific champion. Or if you're going to say that, right, if you're going to have Dolores be such a pinnacle piece, then every 3 months, every 6 months, you need to have an event where it is a guaranteed you can pull Dolores, the best healer in the game, during this event. Save up 250 summoning shards. Right now I have 48, and I'm not pulling often. So like that would be me saving up shards for like 2 or 3 months as a free-to-play player. That's fine, right? Have a balanced system. Have a system like that where you can pull some of the best champions. Like, oh, same thing for a guild boss, right? That dragon. This champion is designed to be a dragon killer. Every 3 months or every 6 months, we will have an event where you can get a dragon killing champion or an AoE champion, right? You could rotate them. So like this month, it's your dragon killers. The next month, it's your AoE champions. The next month, it's your aerial killers. And you would have a guaranteed chance. So when you get like where I'm at on my main account, oh, I need to work on this very specific thing, I don't mind waiting 3 months. That's not what I want to hear. But 3 months is like a tolerable... I can wait 3 months for that. Cool, I can save my resources so that I can focus on getting more defenders on my account. Right now, my main account, I just have all crappy defenders. Like, I have usable ones. Like, they're serviceable, but all of them are not amazing. All of them are not like the legendary ones. And the legendary ones I do think are really well designed. All of them feel good in a different way. But I don't have a way to get like a targeted defender. And one of the contents that I'm working on, I'm getting my butt kicked. And it's literally, I probably just need a legendary healer or a legendary defender to progress in that content. And since there's no way for me to target that specific thing, it is a big frustrating moment. The last frustration that I'll talk about, and again, I think this is a very minor thing. I touched on it earlier because it's actually a very good point to the game, but it's something that I have an idea of how I would balance it out. Let's talk about it first, and then we'll talk about the balance after the fact. So earlier in the game, I mentioned that our rare champions, you know, they feel good. They each have their own very strict, unique purpose of where they are good at, where they will flourish at, why it feels good to use them. When you start off playing the game, you get a lot of these rares, or as you are farming, you start unlocking other rares that you might have not started off the game with. But there's no reason for you to play with them once you get to epics, and definitely once you get to legendaries. If you get a legendary defender, all other defenders become meaningless. Like, there's never a time where you're like, oh man, I really need a second defender. it's one of those moments that once you get a legendary defender, I would even argue like it's kind of the same thing for the epics. Once you get an epic, it doesn't matter if my Glenn here is 5-star fully promoted, has my best tank gear on. The moment I get the epic defender, he starts doing the same job as Glenn, even if Glenn's 5-star. And for me, that's a little bit of a frustration, because if you're a newer player and you don't know what you should be spending resources on, and you invest a lot into Glenn because Glenn was doing well for you in the early game and it felt good, it can set you considerably far back in terms of progression or being at a similar level as other players. So on this account, I'm level 36, but if another player who was level 36, they got a defender, or let's say their first legendary was a defender, but my first epic was a damage dealer, I could be so much further ahead because they focused on their defender, or they focused on a rare, right? Like Glenn was their defender, he was doing a great job, or they needed somebody to tank bosses, so they invested a whole lot into Glenn instead of focusing on the damage and just bursting down the boss in the early game. I don't want too much hand-holding per se, but there needs to be a little bit of a better balance of what you've invested in, especially like, let's say, rares. If you have so many rares, or if so many of your rares are geared up, I would like to see that, like, let's say your rares get a 10% bonus to their stats so that they feel better. And then obviously as you start pulling epics and legendaries, you're going to be taking gear away from your rares and putting it onto your legendaries and your epics. And likewise, you could do the same thing with your epics and your legendaries. Give them a buff that, okay, after you have equipped 5 epics, and they each have, like, you know, all 5 pieces of gear, all your epics get a 5% buff to their stats. And then when you get to legendaries, they get like a 3%. And I named these weird percentages so that the rares feel better, but they don't feel better than the epics, and they don't feel better than the legendaries, but they should feel comparable. That if I heavily invested into Glenn, and that was, like, you know, a mistake, by keeping certain characters geared up or using more of these characters in faction wars and stuff, having them geared up in a way that they're still usable could also keep players playing the game for longer, because then their rares don't feel like a waste. Nero, again, one of my favorite champions in the game. I love his design. Watchers of Realms, if you ever watch this video, please make a legendary version of Nero, like Nero Unbound or something like that, or Nero Flame Ascendant, something crazy. Nero, the new Liu Kang God of Fire. Whatever you have to do, this design, this look is so good. I love the voice actor you've picked for him. I love what his kit does, but he's a rare. And he's a rare that costs a lot to summon. Both of these things make him pretty terrible. And if you get him as your first rare that you pull, you will probably use him. But if, like me, especially on the second account, I wanted to use Nero, I was planning that when I pulled Nero, cool, let's give Nero a try, and we're going to see if he's good or not. And I was going to show where Nero could be good and how he would be good. Unfortunately, Nero's cost, and when I finally got him, I was already 2 weeks into the game. I already had like 7 epics on this account, and I wasn't trying to pull for epics. I was just trying to pull for an event reason or for points or something. And I got plenty of epics. That Selkie, who is, he has a kit that needs a little bit of improvement on it. He's not in a horrible place, but he could be a lot better just by making his bubbles move faster. The amount of attacks that Selkie drops because his animation is not fast enough is beyond infuriating. But Selkie is 10 times the mage that Nero is, just because Selkie only costs 18. He and Nero have like roughly the same like attack speed, I'm gonna say, but like when they throw out their animation, it's roughly the same. Nero's is technically a little bit faster because like he throws a fireball that then explodes on the target and hits everything in that range. Selkie he's got, like Voltus's lightning, but when it goes, if it doesn't hit that first target, it won't bounce to the next target. That is something you need to fix. That is something where it absolutely makes Selkie a terrible, terrible champion, because he's constantly dropping damage. Because if any other damage dealer kills anything around Selkie, you're losing Selkie's damage. So if Selkie has all your best gear, but he left that opponent with like 1 HP, or like if the enemy had 1 HP and as he's throwing his bubble at it, any of your archers just fire an arrow and kill it, there goes your spell. It's just lost, and it feels horrible. It's one of those things, it makes me not want to play with Selkie. And again, your fish people design in this game, Watcher of Realms, is beautiful. This absolutely looks good, creepy, fish-like, fish person-like, and I love all your fish people, and it's something that I didn't really want or think I wanted. And these fish people and your lizard people look great. Their proportions look fantastic. What was the other thing? Is a character like Drogo, when we look at his skills, his basic attack, and I don't know why it says max level because I never was able to upgrade it, but it says attacks deal damage up to 10 enemies. This is incorrect. This is a localization problem that you need to fix. Is he actually only attacks up to 3 enemies. I think his ultimate, when it casts 10 waves, I bet you those 10 waves hit up to 10 targets. That makes tons of sense. And his ultimate feels amazing, by the way. His ultimate feels really good, and it's very thematic for his kit being AoE. I did like that. I don't really have an issue with that. But this basic toolkit, or tooltip, not properly displaying what it actually does. So you either have a programming error that you meant for him to be an archer that can hit up to 10 enemies, but something went wrong and he only hits 3, not 10, or vice versa. Maybe you meant for him to only hit 3 enemies, and your tooltip and during translations or something, the number 10 stayed. This is something that there's a couple of tooltip things like this where your player should be able to read what the basic attack is and know what the basic attack is. So if it says physical attack, it should be a physical attack. Another great example of this is your Regulus. His basic attack says physical attack, but then he deals magic damage to one enemy. Is he dealing physical damage or is he dealing magical damage, right? If your tooltips are difficult for me to understand, that can be a little bit of a difficult pain point for players, or especially for newer players, that if their first legendary is Regulus, and let's say they love this lion looking bro, and he looks good. He's not my cup of tea, but he looks good. You have this sun and lion motif, which is unfortunately beyond common, but he looks good. He looks like a good lion knight. I don't mind him at all. When trying to help a new player understand what this attack does, that is frustrating to be like, well, it says physical attack there, but it says magical attack here. I guess just pair him up with the Frost Witch, who breaks both defense and magic resist. That way, no matter what his damage is, you're doing enough damage. So overall, those are my thoughts of 1 month of Watcher of Realms. Again, I'm not officially at the 1 month mark on this profile. On my other game, like on my main profile, I'm about 2 months in, and I am having a blast. I love talking about this game. I love the strategies of this game. I haven't felt like I've gotten to a level where you need this legendary, otherwise you cannot do enough damage or you can't complete enough things. I did get a legendary on my main account, which trivialized almost all of the normal campaign for me, because the way his kit worked, when he kills something, his attack can bounce to the next target. I can't tell you how overly easy he made the game. That might be something like, in terms of rebalancing, you might put that under his like promotion 5 before allowing that attack to bounce around and kill everything. But I guess that's also the point, right? That, you know, depending on who you pull, when you pull them, it'll change your experience of the game. But Watcher of Realms, you have created an amazing game. I absolutely love this game. I hope that you guys make plenty of money. This is a fantastic style gacha. You know, there's little tweaks. Obviously, I have some small criticisms for you, but overall, the amount that I've spent talking about this video, or in this video, the amount of time I've spent talking about this game, I hope you realize how much this game is a well-designed, really interesting game, and I hope that you continue at the pace that you are. With characters like Lazir and Hex that you just released, I hope that, right, reel it back a little bit. Don't go too incredible with every new champion. Make sure to keep them in the realm of the other champions. I get that your designs will get better every month, but make sure that you either update some of the older legendary champions like Crack, who is now just horribly outscaled by like any piercer or any other mage does what Crack does better. So Crack's shotgun, it's just not the same as like any other mage that acts like a shotgun as well. Guys, thank you very much for watching me review and talk about this game. And of course, until that next time, ta-ta.